Connecticut lawmakers have approved a bill to provide sentence relief to people who are still incarcerated over marijuana despite the state enacting legalization. The legislature's joint judiciary, it's funny how they call it a joint judiciary committee, advanced the legislation from Representative Josh Elliott, Democrats, on Monday. SB 444 would create a pathway for the dismissal or sentencing reduction of cases involving cannabis offenses that have since been made legal. People who are incarcerated on probation or participating in diversionary programs for marijuana possession, paraphernalia possession, or distribution would be eligible to have their cases reviewed and potentially discharged. The committee co-chair, Representative Steve Staffstrom, also a Democrat, said during Monday's hearing that while the goals of this bill are very laudable, he considers it to be a work in progress with logistical issues relating to identifying eligible cases. However, he agreed to hold a vote because lawmakers were facing a legislative deadline to advance the measure from committee to keep it alive for the session. He said, "I think we're struggling with how to actually effectuate this bill, the intent of this bill, given the recognition that, frankly, a lot of our drug possession offenses were categorized as the same. And it would really take some manual work to go through the records to determine whether someone was charged with, say, possession of cannabis as opposed to possession of heroin or cocaine or some other controlled substance. Well, I think this bill, unfortunately, probably still has some work to do and a little bit of an uphill battle in terms of what the cost might be for the agencies to effectuate this. But we will vote it out today." Representative John Kissel, a Republican ranking member of the committee, said that he appreciates advocates' intention to clean up records, especially for low-level, typically marijuana possession offenses. However, he said it is unfortunately the case that implementing the reform would prove challenging for procedural reasons. The Last Prisoner Project estimates that 1,200 people would be eligible for relief under the bill, and according to the State Department of Corrections, the state would save $2,500 on average per person released under the legislation. Adrian Roca, a police analyst at LPP, told Marijuana Moment, ahead of the planned vote on the legislation was ultimately delayed last week, it would be one of the most expansive sentence modification laws in the country. An earlier version of the legislation was not ultimately enacted last year, but state prosecutors did heed to call for mass relief, dismissing more than 1,500 marijuana cases, while modifying about 600 others. The Judiciary Committee also met last week and approved separate legislation to decriminalize psilocybin. Meanwhile, on the one-year anniversary of the opening of adult-use marijuana market in Connecticut, in January, state officials announced that 2023 saw more than $250 million in total sales between the recreational and medical cannabis markets, and that was $274 million. I'm Todd Dangan with High 9 News. What do you say about Connecticut's attempt to get people out of jail? I think it's always great when they try to do that, but the fact that their laws currently lump every drug together just got to make you crazy, right?
That's called judicial crossfading.
And that's typical.
Oh, that's cute,
that's not different. It's in a lot of places it's controlled substance, and that's it. It's like, right. I mean, I've even been victim to that, right? I've been, in trouble for cannabis in my life, and many a time on that paperwork it says possession of a controlled substance, which is, it's like kind of messed up, right? Because and this has happened post legalization in a couple instances, and it's not congruent with state law. It's not congruent with the way that cannabis is moving throughout every community almost in this country. So it's like they definitely need to overhaul that. They definitely need to add marijuana in its own category, because it's so pejorative when you're a in possession of cannabis, and your paperwork says controlled substance, and that's the way it's categorized. Now, explaining that to whoever looks at that documentation, whether it's an employer, whether it's your family, whatever. I mean, it's you already have a hurdle and an obstacle to overcome just based on what it's defined as. And I think that's part of the problem that has been historically, keeping a lot of cannabis users out of potentially certain employment or even certain housing. So yeah, I think that it's definitely a problem. Hopefully that changes, but it's not just Connecticut; it's a lot of other places too.
I find it interesting also that they said it's going to take a lot of work, so we're thinking about not doing it.
I mean, that's just a typical government answer right there.
Are you ready for the most glaring fake news within the news for this article? Are you guys ready for this?
Yep.
Okay. Like Joe Pesci and my cousin Vinny. Okay. So this is what just chaps my hide. According to the State Department of Corrections, we know them to be an incredibly reliable source of data. The state would save $2,500 on average per person released under the legislation. Are you kidding me? You spend $2,500 just on the cost of delivering a toothbrush to an inmate's cell, and you want us to believe that the financial benefit to the taxpayers for releasing individual inmates is only a net $2,500 savings to the state? That is, as Mr. Schaefer would say when he is on this show, some bullshit. Because you're saving a lot more than that per year, not per prisoner, but per year in releasing those eligible or potentially eligible cannabis those people incarcerated. So that's really challenging for me, because when we're looking at public policy decisions, we should always look at cost benefit. And I would say that they're going to save a lot more than that, and that there's a much larger cost benefit.
Yeah, well, according to the Google machine, Connecticut has one of the highest pay-to-stay rates in the country. The cost of incarcerating one inmate is $249 per day, or $90,885 per year.
Right, and so they want to tell me that they're going to save 2% releasing those people. What that tells me is that that's absolutely disingenuous, quote unquote, data to say they're only going to save $2,500 per release.
Maybe that's the deterrent, Yarrow. Maybe that's saying, we're only going to save 2%. Might as well just keep them in there. And honestly, it's the worst part is those, in most cases, I can't speak for every prison, but obviously we know that there is a prison industry in this country, and those industries collect a lot of revenues from a lot of corporations that give their work to the inmates to perform, so that the prison industry can.
So let's do the motherfucking math, okay?
I think
if there are 1,200 people who are eligible for this,
I don't buy that number.
So if there are 1,200 people who are eligible for this, according to the article, and if Todd Dankins' expert Google searching has indicated that it costs that state about $90,000 a year per inmate, 1,200 inmates times $90,000 a year, you do that math, and that's per year. Some of these inmates are scheduled for more than 1 year. So that's a pretty substantial saving.
I have a question. What are the parameters that someone would be eligible for a pardon under this? Because I think that'll help us get to a number better if we know that. Because if it's just small drug possession, most of those people are not in jail. Okay, this is about as significant as the Biden pardons.
Okay, so before we go partisan, all I want to say is that taking that $1,200 number and multiplying it by $90,000 a year, we get lots of millions of dollars saved. And I love saving the taxpayer money, especially when it's the right thing to do, and especially when it helps us to evolve as a society. So releasing these people and taking that burden, that financial burden off the taxpayer, most people would argue that that's a win. And then you have the Department of Corrections coming in and saying, we're only going to save $2,500 per person released, and that's just not even close to accurate.
These numbers ain't adding up to me. This is a whole bunch of malarkey.
And just so you know, the Connecticut Department of Corrections has a budget of $641.4 million.
How much was that?
$641 million.
Yep. All right, we're gonna keep this train rolling, you guys. I'm gonna roll into my story because that was Rico's story originally.